Imagine you're trying to keep a secret, but every time you tell someone, don't tell anyone, they immediately go tell everyone, right? And this happens over and over. Would you keep trying? In Mark's gospel, Jesus does exactly this. He heals someone, commands silence. They proclaim it everywhere. Is Jesus bad at keeping secrets, or is something else going on entirely? Let's look at the pattern itself. In Mark chapter 1, Jesus encounters a demon-possessed man in a synagogue. The demon recognizes Jesus and cries out. Jesus responds, "Be silent." He casts it out. That same chapter, verse 34, Jesus heals many people and the demons try to speak. Mark tells us Jesus would not permit the demons to speak because they knew him. Then a leper comes for healing. Jesus heals him, gives a stern warning, tell no one. What happens? The man goes out and proclaims it freely. Jesus' fame spreads so widely he can't enter towns openly. This pattern repeats throughout Mark's gospel. Scholars call it the Messianic Secret, the recurring commands to silence about Jesus' identity. In the early 20th century, a German scholar proposed an explanation. Mark invented this secrecy motif to explain why Jesus wasn't recognized as Messiah during his lifetime. But there's a problem. If the goal is actual secrecy, it fails every single time. Jesus' fame grows despite the commands, not because they work. The pattern is too consistent to be about failed information control. Mark must be doing something else. The answer lies in who understands Jesus in this gospel and who doesn't. Mark creates a hierarchy of understanding. At the top, demons. They recognize Jesus instantly, every time. They know exactly who he is. Also at the top, you, the reader. Mark tells you in verse 1, the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. You know from the start. This creates dramatic irony, a literary technique where the audience knows something, the characters don't. You're aligned with the demon's knowledge, watching characters stumble in confusion. Now look at who misunderstands. The crowd spread news about Jesus, but they don't grasp its meaning. More striking, the disciples, they witness miracle after miracle and they remain confused. In chapter 4, Jesus calms a violent storm. The disciples' response, "Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?" They've just seen divine power over nature, and they're still asking who he is. In chapter 6, after Jesus feeds 5,000 people and walks on water, Mark delivers this verdict. They did not understand about the loaves, but their hearts were hardened. Proximity to Jesus doesn't guarantee understanding. Mark's theological point emerges. Miracles don't produce faith. Power displays don't reveal identity. Even watching Jesus perform wonders leaves people confused about who he is. This continues to the cross itself. In Mark 15, Jesus cries out in Aramaic, "Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani," my God, why have you forsaken me?" He's quoting Psalm 22, a lament, but the bystanders mishear, and they think he's calling for Elijah. Even at the moment of crucifixion, misunderstanding persists. The sounds are similar, Eloi, Elijah, but the confusion runs deeper than phonetics. People cannot hear what Jesus is actually saying. So when does a human finally get it right? Mark saves this moment for the most unexpected place. Chapter 15, verse 39. Jesus has just died. The centurion standing opposite him, a Roman soldier, a Gentile, an executioner, watches Jesus breathe his last, and he says, "Truly this man was the Son of God." This is the first human in the entire gospel to correctly identify Jesus, not Peter, not the disciples, not the religious leaders, a pagan soldier at an execution. Mark's placement is deliberate. Consider the circumstances of this confession. It doesn't come after a miracle, it comes at death. It doesn't come from an insider, it comes from an outsider. It doesn't come at a moment of triumph, it comes at apparent defeat. Mark structures his entire gospel around this reversal. The narrative arc rises through miracles and power in chapters 1 through 10, but understanding decreases. The journey to Jerusalem in chapters 11 through 14 builds tension. Then the cross in chapter 15, the moment of apparent failure becomes the moment of revelation. Recognition comes at the point of defeat, not triumph. This transforms how we read the Messianic Secret. And the silence commands aren't about information control, they're about the conditions for understanding. Mark argues that Jesus' identity cannot be grasped through power alone. Watching miracles doesn't produce recognition. Even the disciples who lived with Jesus, heard his teaching, witnessed his works, remain confused. The secret isn't that Jesus is the Messiah, and the reader knows that from verse 1. The secret is how to understand what Messiah means, and that understanding comes only at the cross. Mark's gospel makes a radical claim. Jesus is revealed most fully in his death. The centurion sees what the disciples missed. He watches Jesus die, not perform a miracle, not demonstrate power, not escape the cross, and in that moment recognizes the Son of God. This inverts expectations. Ancient readers expected divine figures to display power. Mark shows a crucified man. They expected recognition to come from insiders. Mark gives it to an executioner. They expected triumph to reveal identity. Mark points to apparent defeat. The cross isn't an obstacle to understanding Jesus, it's the key. Some readers assume the disciples eventually understand, they're just slow learners. But Mark's gospel doesn't show this. The original ending, chapter 16, verse 8, has the women fleeing the empty tomb in fear and silence. They tell no one. Mark leaves the disciples in confusion. The centurion, not Peter, provides the climactic confession. Others assume demons recognizing Jesus is just a supernatural detail. Mark uses it as a literary device. Evil spirits see what humans can't. Right? This forces a question. Why can demons perceive what disciples miss? The answer points back to the cross as the place of true seeing. When you read Mark's gospel, watch for this pattern. Notice who understands and who doesn't. Track the disciples' confusion. It never fully resolves before the resurrection. Watch how demons recognize Jesus while humans remain blind. Pay attention to the commands to silence and the proclamations that follow. Mark trains readers to see that the answer to who is Jesus isn't found in the miracles. The feeding of thousands doesn't reveal it. The calming of storms doesn't reveal it. Walking on water doesn't reveal it. The cross reveals it. A Roman centurion watching a man die speaks the truth that disciples couldn't grasp. Mark's secret isn't about keeping information hidden. It's about where recognition becomes possible.